Hello, and welcome to a panel discussion on the digital society, the changing skills landscape. We are delighted that you're joining us. Now, it is my pleasure to announce our first speaker, Damien Shevlin. Damien?
Yes, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Look, I'm here today to welcome you to a panel discussion on the changing skills landscape, an incredibly important topic and clearly very relevant topic in the current climate. My name's Damien Shevlin. I'm the Senior Vice President for HR, UK and Ireland and Northern Europe here at Atos. I'm delighted to be joined today by a number of experts from the industry, from professional bodies, who will be sharing their insights, perspectives, expertise on this really important topic. So really looking forward to getting into that discussion. So this session today forms a number of activities that Atos are leading on digital society, which is the thought leadership series bringing to life how digital technologies are shaping society. And we're doing that in a number of ways. We're examining digital technologies in different areas, considering changes experienced by different regions, and also in the context of COVID-19, of course, we bring that out, which is an incredibly important topic right now. I'm really proud to be the executive sponsor of the skills stream, and I'm now going to introduce our esteemed panel. So John, can I ask you to first introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Damien, and welcome everybody to this panel session. Great to have you on board listening to us, even though it's difficult circumstances at the minute. But for me, I'm Head of Strategy and Portfolio for Atos in the UK, but I'm also part of our global group of thought leaders, a group that we call the Scientific Community. And digital society, changing digital skills happens to be one of the topics that we've researched quite deeply over the last couple of years. So hopefully we'll be able to share some of that thinking during this session. But great to be with you.
Fantastic, thanks, John. And I'm also joined by Katie Jacobs, who's the Senior Stakeholder Lead at CIPD. Unfortunately, Katie's having some technical problems, so can't get her video to work to join us today. But Katie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you, Damien, and apologies that my camera is not working. It seems very appropriate. I'm joining a panel to talk about digital skills and digital society, but I do not have the requisite digital skills to get my own webcam working today. Anyway, my name is Katie. I work at the CIPD. The CIPD is the UK's professional body for HR and people development. My role there is that I work with our HR leader population, so kind of at CHRO level. I am also a business journalist, and I write and speak a lot about the changing world of work. CIPD has a lot of data and thinking on the development of the skills landscape and how it's being impacted by technology. So very excited to be able to share some of that with you today, even if you can't see me doing so. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie, thanks. And Iain Simmons, a Global Head of Client Services at AMS. Iain, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I work for Alexander Mann Solutions. We're a global talent acquisition provider. My focus is typically with organisations in the tech and digital sector. And my recruitment history spans about 20 years. So I think my background started in the days when we used to fax paper CVs to customers as part of that process. So clearly there's been a huge amount of transition through that time. And being involved in talent acquisition through that period as well, clearly I have a vested interest in looking at how organisations can adapt and change to meet the ever-changing demands of the world. And I think in particular of recent times, both through the pandemic, but also through the pace of change in technology. You know, we've seen that change happening at a faster pace than ever before. So again, my vested interest and something that AMS as an organisation are very focused on is how can we help organisations leverage and take advantage of the possibilities and the opportunities that this presents while controlling and maximising or minimising risk as well. So it's great to talk to you all today. Very much looking forward to the ongoing discussion.
Very good, thanks, Iain. And Nimmi Patel, a Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK. So Nimmi, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. Hope you're keeping well. yeah, like Damien said, I'm the policy manager for skills, talent and diversity at techUK, which is a tech trade association with 850 members. My interest and kind of techUK's interest in the skills landscape stems from being able to provide the best and the brightest of digital talent at all skill levels throughout the pipeline from classroom to boardroom. So really excited to get stuck in today.
Great, thank you, Nimmi. And finally, Tom OReilly, Head of Group Strategy at QA. Could you introduce yourself, please, Tom?
Hi, thank you for joining us, everybody. This is a new way of doing a panel discussion, but it's tremendously exciting at the same time. I'm Head of Group Strategy at QA. We're the largest tech talent and skills provider in the UK. So we work with organisations ranging from the very largest enterprises right down to small SMEs, helping them with their tech talent needs through learning, development, and upskilling, retraining.
Great, thank you, Tom. So a really great panel. Looking forward to the discussion today. I'm sure some really interesting and exciting topics and areas will come out. So please, audience, do ask questions as we go through. I'll make sure that I leave at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end for you to, for me to ask those questions on your behalf of this very, very impressive panel. So I'm going to dive straight in because we've got quite a few really good questions for our panel. So John and Iain, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to understand from your perspective what the main drivers or mega trends behind this changing skills landscape are, and what particular changes you're seeing, the different skills, the volume of skills, and also how businesses are acquiring those skills. So John, could I jump to you first, please?
Sure, thanks, Damien. Well, I mean, what a huge question. You know, really, change is just accelerating massively. You know, previously there was a whole load of statistics around about how long people's education lasted them, and you know, how quickly skills were changing. With the advent of new and continually evolving digital technologies in particular, the pace at which skills are becoming obsolete is just accelerating. So we are absolutely in a world now where unless you are continually learning, continually refining your skill sets, then you will quickly become obsolete. It's almost like within a career lifespan, you probably have to reinvent yourself at least 5 or 6 times now. You know, a job for life, a career for life, sitting within a particular path no longer is appropriate. I think the other thing that, or one other thing I would say, is that the way people learn and acquire skills is changing massively now, and that really, and we were kind of commenting this as we were waiting to join this panel, that we are now all kind of masters of our own destiny in terms of the skills that we need to do just to do this kind of thing. Whereas previously we might have had experts on hand to help us manage video calls and so on. Now we're just expected to learn everything, pick it up on our own, and we're not even given usually formal training to do that. So self-starting, self-learning is now a style that is shaping the way that people equip themselves for the way of work. And then the last thing I'd comment before I hand over to Iain for his views is the way that we make ourselves available into the job market is changing. So with the advent of platforms, the advent of social media and being able to market yourself, put yourself out there, is changing massively. And therefore employers are able to see much more easily what there is out there, and people can take control over their own careers more. And I think this is driving much more of a move to what I would bags all together in terms of a phrase of the gig economy, being able to easily match people who've got skills or who want to do something with people who need skills and need somebody to work for them. And I'll probably touch on that whole kind of gig economy and platform mentality a little bit later on. But those are probably the 3 major things that I see, Damien.
Great, thanks, John. And you know, the pace of skills becoming obsolete, the pace of learning, and how we need to refine our skills, I think absolutely critical and a really, really important point. So thank you, John. Iain, I'm going to bring you in on this discussion as well, if you could give us some insight.
I think what we've noticed, I mean, over the years, is it's not necessarily the whole kind of gamut of what candidates want from work that is changing, but it's the level of priority that they apply to those different elements. And I think even pre the pandemic, there was a real shift towards candidates looking for organisations that had a real purpose, and not only had that purpose, but were able to clearly articulate what that purpose is, so they could start to feel whether it was a good personal and cultural fit for them, where they could add value to that business. Linked to that is organisations that give clear goals. So candidates really do want to understand what an organisation expects from them, and then to have that feedback all the way through the engagement, clear, honest, frank feedback. So again, they can see and feel the value that they're bringing to an organisation, and that whole kind of recognition piece. Pre-pandemic, clearly flexible working was becoming a huge driver for people. I think pre-pandemic, about 30% of people had the opportunity to work remotely and from home, for example. But the expectation is post-pandemic, that will continue at above 50%, with it becoming a real driver for people now that they've had the opportunity, albeit slightly enforced by the pandemic, to work from home to a greater degree. So again, that whole kind of flexible working piece is a huge value to candidates in today's market, and that's not going to change. I mean, that's only going to increase. And again, I think in the context of flexible working, it's not just remote working, it's flexible time, it's compressed hours, reduced hours, etc. And that isn't necessarily just a generational thing. I mean, I think a lot gets made of the differences between the different generations. But whether you're in your 50s and looking for a different way to almost kind of step back from the career path and have a more kind of flexible approach, or whether you're in an entry-level career opportunity and so on, I think people are really looking for that increased level of flex from organisations to work with. And I think in 2008, as John's alluded to, around the gig economy, so we saw a huge increase in gig work, if you want to call it that, after the last economic slowdown. And again, I think the anticipation is that that's only going to increase post-pandemic as well, not just forced by the economic impacts of the pandemic, but also through people's personal choice and that flexibility that they want. And again, I think going back to a point that John made, the half-life of skills now is about 6 years. It used to be about 30 years, according to the World Economic Forum. So again, what candidates are looking for is organisations that can offer those learning opportunities, as well as obviously focusing on their own self-learning, but offer those learning opportunities a bit more broadly than simply online and classroom-based training. So it's real experiential learning, and that is a real kind of incentive for candidates to look at employers. And that's through mentoring, through buddying, through working with subject matter experts. And I think the general feeling is, and it was pre-pandemic as well, that the whole career ladder piece is a complete misnomer today, because what candidates want to be able to do is move around flexibly in an organisation. So they want to be able to move horizontally, they want to be able to learn new skills. Progression isn't just about moving upwards in a career ladder, it really is about having that broader opportunity. And that makes it hugely attractive for candidates if organisations can clearly articulate that and share that with them. And then again, I think the final one that I probably want to mention is authenticity as well. And I think that's no more important historically than it is now, while we're in this pandemic period. So people want to know that organisations are being authentic. They want to be able to trust organisations. So every touch point that they have, when they're going through an application process and so on, really has to echo the experience of when they join an organisation. Because I think that kind of whole ethics and trust piece, again, has become a huge positive for organisations if they feel that, for candidates, if they feel that an organisation can offer that.
Iain, thank you. Really insightful views from a candidate's perspective, and really interesting, actually, the point you make around the flexible working, which I think a lot of people would assume that would really appeal more to millennials and the newer generations coming in. But actually, as you describe it, that's across generations, which is fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Capability Jane, the UK&I firm, did a really interesting survey to look at the generational and also the gender differences around what people want from flexibility of work. And it was about 80% of females saw that as a major differentiator when applying for roles. 92% of millennials, so it clearly is really important to that generation. but even the larger proportion of over 50s felt it was really, really important to them as well. So again, it's a key differentiator, I think, for candidates in today's world.
Fantastic, thanks, Iain. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question, where I'm going to bring in Tom, Nimmi, and Katie. So as part of our Digital Society Thought Leadership series, we're looking at different digital technology and looking at 6 very distinct areas, actually. So productivity, innovation, ethics of AI, future skills, sustainability, and digital infrastructure. So with the changing technology in mind, could you think about the impacts that you've seen as a result of this, and bring in what the business impact, also thinking individuals and society? So Tom, can I bring you in on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So to echo, I fully agree with what Iain and John have said. And the macro picture, if you think about this, is that UK's productivity growth has been flat. There is a huge skills gap. And I'm always very wary of taking data and stories pre-COVID and extrapolating them to a post-COVID world, because I think so much has changed quite so fundamentally. It's a very dangerous game. But I think certainly on digital acceleration, effectively, we don't know the quite extent of the change, but the broad assumption that no one disagrees with is it's put a rocket booster on it. And so to put that in perspective, 20 years ago, think of the technology in the workplace. It was a land of CRT screens and Nokia 3210s. And over the last 20 years, we've migrated to position that we are now doing video calls with hundreds of people. The next 20 years is going to be an even greater level of change. But over a period of a rolling 20-year period, you recycle, as it were, less than half of your workforce. And that's probably again slowing down as retirement ages get longer. So therefore, you have a huge need for up and reskilling as the technology changes, but the workforce will remain largely consistent because it evolves over time. So this technological change, which we're going to see over the next 20 years, is going to have to be dealt with by many of the same people who are in our workforce today. And that creates an enormous need for up and reskilling. Now, the upskilling there are many skills, and digital skills are the most acute ones, but actually there are others too, and we shouldn't forget about the increasing need for cultural sensitivity, increasing need for greater social and socialization skills. But on the digital skills side, the research done by the Industrial Skills Council suggests that by 2030, we're going to have in the UK alone about 20% of the workforce as acutely underskilled in digital skills. And then a further 68% of the workforce. That leaves basically 90% of the workforce overall, but a further 68% as some degree underskilled in digital skills. So you're looking at 5 million people acutely underskilled in digital skills and a further 16 million people with some level of underskilling. And so there will be a huge burden on employers, but individuals to learn new skills in digital arenas. What kinds of skills we talk about there? Well, that could be everything from, frankly, quite basic digital literacy, right? How to use a computer, how to use basic office productivity suites, Excel, PowerPoint, and so on. And then you get to a kind of intermediate level, which actually you're comfortable, say, doing data analysis. You're comfortable doing preparing visual presentations that aren't just standing up and talking. Through to much more we're seeing a particularly acute end, which is people now have to be much more familiar with some quite advanced systems. It is no longer acceptable to just come in and use a legacy system. You've got to have people who are familiar with cloud, who are familiar with developing apps, who are familiar with developing web systems. The kind of more advanced digital skills is where we're seeing the most acute shortages at the moment. And I think we will continue to do so because certainly at the lower levels, natural attrition and regeneration into the workforce will solve many of those issues. 83% of the younger generation coming in have the basic digital skills compared to half who are 40 plus. So the lower level skills will be solved or will be helped along the way by demographic shift. The higher level skills will require active investment and support. But also, I think we will see sector shift. Right? It is worth noting just the sheer extent of the sector shift which the coronavirus has accelerated. Right? We will likely see substantial impact on the high street. Right? And TM Lewin gone into a pre-pack administration. We see the retail stores extensively shutting down into going bust. So I think that that reskilling will also entail a sector shift, right? That there will be large numbers of people, for instance, who work in, say, warehouses at the moment, who will not be going back, right? Take a classic example, Next faced a huge backlash for keeping its warehouse open during the coronavirus outbreak because it had a very undigitized warehouse, which meant that it was still very reliant on manual labor and large numbers of people. John Lewis has been doing a roaring trade out of its online warehouse because it has one of the most advanced and automated warehouses in Europe, if not the world. So the people who were at Next, unlikely to go back because A, will Next survive? Probably, but they're going to have to invest very heavily in their warehouse, which they're selling and leasing back. But companies are going to very quickly shift to those automated solutions, and those jobs will change, and people will be coming out of retail and warehousing and having to go into other skills. Similar example in places like the civil aviation industry. So I think that we're going to have to see huge upskilling, but also reskilling for people leaving completely different sectors and job roles into the tech environment. And of course, vested interest here, that's what I do, right? That's what QA does with a large static. But I fundamentally believe that that is an overall trend, which there's many other providers as well who will help along that journey.
Thanks, Tom. Really important points there. And, clearly the investment in the upskilling and reskilling is key, both from a company and organisation perspective, but also from a government perspective as well. So thank you. So Nimmi, could I bring you in on this question, please?
Sure. Picking up on what Tom said, Microsoft stated that COVID-19 drove 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months, and Ocado has seen 20 years of growth in 12 weeks. So the absolute breadth of what's been happening during this public health crisis remains to be seen, but a lot of digital transformation has happened, and with that brings the need for digital skills. And I think innovation often brings opportunities and challenges. There are legitimate concerns about what the impact will be on those whose industries are disrupted. Like Tom mentioned, it will be sort of looking at kind of retail and other different sectors as to how they use automation and new technologies. But I think as history teaches, automation and new technologies will not replace human work, but rather transform it, hopefully boosting existing unemployment and creating new types of work. There's been a lot of data out there done by McKinsey, for instance, on the impact of automation on the sort of different genders and exploring how that will change the world of work. And I think it's important to know that some people fear that we aren't ready for what's coming. So techUK surveyed parents working in the tech sector to find out what they thought the future of work held for their children. We decided to survey parents in the tech sector because they've got a little bit more of an understanding of the job opportunities in the industry itself. And we found that parents were not convinced that the education system will help develop the opportunities required for children, with 73% of those surveyed feeling that the curriculum would not put sufficient emphasis on the skills that would be needed for the future of work, and 90% believing their children will need to retrain throughout their lives to keep up with the pace of technological change. I think, echoing on what John said, the need for us to embrace lifelong learning is at the core of everything that we do for now and the future. And of course, the fourth industrial revolution has many unknowns, one of which is that we are faced with the task of, preparing for jobs that we don't know what will be, that don't exist yet. And I guess we prepare by ensuring that everyone, no matter their age, ethnicity, gender, background, or even skill level, is given the opportunity to gain the skills they need to thrive. So really using that upskilling, reskilling, and retraining piece. I think new technologies can also be hugely positive, allowing workers to be more creative and have a better work-life balance. So flexible working and people's relationships with organizations are becoming more fluid, and the number of contractors, freelancers, and portfolio workers are increasing. So it's all about sort of how we identify and how we engage with this flexible, diverse talent, that will become increasingly important. And skills and education are fundamental and at the core of that, as to how we take advantage of the opportunities and combat the challenges to innovation.
Very, very good. Thanks, Nimmi. And really fascinating around the education piece. I also hold a personal view around education and whether it is preparing our children and employees' future enough. And I know we're also doing quite a bit of work with some universities and colleges to help that, but it is a concern. And I think that's 73% in the survey of parents in the tech sector being concerned is very, very telling. Thanks, Nimmi. So Katie, could I bring you in on this, please?
Yeah, thank you, Damien. And just trying to think of something I can say that Tom and Nimmi haven't said already. But to build on their points, I think a reflection that I often have is that every organisation now is a digital organisation. There's no such thing as an organisation that is digital and one that isn't. And every job is pretty much a digital job. And I think as Tom reflected, you're going to see that maybe under stronger focus post coronavirus as we move into rebuild and recovery phase, because a lot of organisations have had to shift their operating models quite dramatically. And a lot of organisations that might have relied more on kind of a bricks and mortar approach are going to have to pivot in order to survive. So that means kind of skills obviously they need are different. I just want to touch on two things. The first would be around the automation piece. So as Nimmi said, there's lots of, I think there's a lot of fear around that, the robots are going to come and take our jobs and that automation is going to put swathes of people out of work. According to an evidence review that the CIPD did, we found that in a lot of sectors of the economy, emerging work-related technologies actually complement and extend human capabilities more than they make current roles redundant. And in a separate survey of employers around the use of AI and automation, we found the same, that more jobs have actually been augmented and created than eliminated as a result of new technology. And we also found within that survey, the same thing that Nimmi mentioned, that people whose jobs had been affected by AI and automation were actually finding that their jobs had become a bit more interesting, and it was leading to improvements in job quality. So we asked them things like, is it getting rid of the more monotonous tasks you used to do? Is it making your work more interesting and complex and varied? And on the whole, people said yes. So that's a really positive thing. I think the piece that's slightly missing is, in order to implement those tools effectively, your staff need to have the more skills and knowledge. So how are you going to give them that skills and knowledge? And it needs to be it's not about the tool, right? It's about how you use the tool. And in order to do that, the design needs to be done very much in relation to humans who then integrate them with wider work processes. So I would say this working for an HR-based organization, but it does all come back to the people stuff, to HR and to organizational design issues. It's not just about putting a tool in and then assuming that everybody, A, will know how to use it, B, will benefit from using it, and C, it will make your productivity absolutely brilliant. It's about so much more than that. So it's quite a complex picture about how AI and automations is shaping jobs, and it really has to be managed very carefully. And I think because of the risk of kind of social inequality coming out of COVID-19, it needs to be managed even more carefully now. But I think there are kind of really positive opportunities out there. And we found that, it could be successful for businesses and for employees as well in actually effectively improving productivity and job quality. And then the other thing I just want to touch on briefly, but I think we will come back to this, is the growing recognition that what really matters is the development of essential skills, also known as employability skills, also known as soft skills, although we don't like that phrase at the CIPD because actually these skills are some of the hardest ones to develop. But those are the skills like teamwork, like communication, presenting, problem solving, positivity, staying positive, creativity, aiming high, all of that kind of stuff. And those skills are applicable to absolutely everybody. So whether you're leaving the school system, whether you're needing to reskill yourself, as Tom's saying, to remain relevant, or even for leaders. I held a dinner last year for very senior kind of chief people officers in London talking about this. And one of the CPOs reflected when we were talking about these types of skills that she had more trouble getting her executive team to consistently display them than she did getting them out of school leavers. So they really are relevant for everybody. And these are the skills that are the most transferable. And that's what's really important right now, given the state of the economy. As some sectors are busier than ever and some have effectively gone into hibernation, we need people that are able to move between sectors and move between different types of job roles. And ultimately, while the digital skills are really, really important, in order to be able to build those digital skills, you need to have the learning agility in the first place. So it's those kind of skills that we need to focus on building as well.
Thanks, Katie. Can agree with you more. I think the softer skills, I know you don't like the phrase, but they're incredibly important. And actually, in terms of leadership, especially as we've been through this COVID crisis, those strong leaders are really showing those softer skills that you've just described as well. So thank you. I really love your every job is a digital job as well. That's a great quote and absolutely spot on as well. So I'm going to move to the next question. So Iain and John, I'm going to bring you back in on this one. We've touched upon this to some degree. So I'm looking at demographic and societal changes. So we mentioned the generations in the workforce. So some people would argue there are 5 generations in the workforce. The death of the jobs for millennials, new generations coming into the workplace. So interested in your on how this is impacting skills and skills acquisition. Iain, can I come to you first?
You're on mute, Iain.
Yeah, I don't think there's a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to the generational conversation, to be honest, because I think obviously people's needs are people's needs, and while I think it gives people a nice, convenient way to describe things, actually it doesn't necessarily apply that every aspect of a millennial's needs are the same as the over 50s, etc. So I guess that's one of the challenges that businesses have is how do you really make sure that you adapt and change your approach to make sure that you have the flexibility within your talent acquisition strategy, and particularly to focus on finding the right resource at the right time, but then also offering the right things to those people. Because while I think the jobs for life statement might have died quite a while ago, and I don't know anybody who's joined an organisation in the last 20 or 30 years with an expectation of a job for life. But that doesn't mean that people aren't still looking for long-term careers with organisations that can offer them that fulfilment and tick all of the boxes that I mentioned earlier on today. So I think, if we just kind of go back to what's driving candidates at the moment, I mean, I think, the 9 to 5 job, I think is very much changing to people wanting to be able to work when they want and to have the flexibility to be able to do that. And again, that isn't necessarily a generational thing. I think that's just a drive because of the cultural and societal changes that we're seeing. I think organisation or candidates are certainly very much more aware of the behaviours of organisations now than they probably ever have been before. A great example would be that CareerArc did a survey recently where it said that 87% of candidates would be less likely to apply to an organisation that was seen to have dealt poorly with the difficult messages around COVID and potential layoffs and so on than they would other organisations. So again, because candidates have access to so much information now, it's really, really important that that organisations are aware of that and kind of are focused around conveying the right messages and behaving responsibly as far as candidates see that. I think the approach around flexible working as well has really accelerated the change in management styles and management approaches as well. So while it was an evolution pre-pandemic, I mean, certainly one of the things that we're seeing from our customers now is that, managers are having to rapidly change their management style, and the management based on outputs rather than a task level has become essential. And again, I think most organisations are recognising that there's some real value to doing that ongoing as well, as we eventually come out of the pandemic. And I guess the other thing that I think certainly businesses are recognising is that they really do have to adapt their whole approach to talent acquisition, their go-to-market strategy, to capitalise on all of these new requirements from individuals as well. So this whole thing about purpose, trust, authenticity, flexibility, etc. I think it's really important that organisations are able to convey that to candidates as they go through a kind of hiring process. I think They're also recognizing that they need to change the way that the candidates are assessed on joining organizations as well. So absolutely, in the gig economy, typically it might be hiring for capability right here and now. But again, I think to the point that the other panelists have made, when you're hiring people on a permanent basis with an organization, there has to be a real focus on how you assess people for that learning agility, you know, for that positivity, you know, for all of those different aspects of personality, because the skills they have today are probably not going to be the skills a business requires in 2, 3, 4 years. So again, the ability to test that elasticity of learning, I think, is really key as you go through that process. But again, I mean, I think, you know, the big one for me, again, is be honest and capitalize on your strengths as an organization just as much as you expect, you know, candidates to do the same in return. So, you know, I think there are some real positive stories coming out of this pandemic around organizations recognizing that they're really going to have to invest in their workers. There was AT&T, for example, last week publicized that they were spending $1 billion on retraining their existing workers to try and give them the digital skills and the mindset to be able to work with them long term. So again, I think whilst, you know, there may not be that whole kind of job for life piece at the moment, people can still build really long-term valuable careers with organizations. You know, I think providing those organizations are clear and open and honest and transparent about what they can and can't do with people. So again, I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens in this post-pandemic world, but I genuinely do think that one of the things that is going to stand out is organizations who are transparent, open, and you know, and clear with their communications right now will be the ones that benefit post-pandemic when it comes to attracting the best candidates in the marketplace, for sure.
Great, thank you. John, can I bring you in on this, please?
Yeah, great, thank you. So really interesting insights there, Iain. I would absolutely agree that actually the biggest problem that we have facing us now is a cultural one. You know, I think it's a huge mistake to make assumptions that the digital divide comes from a kind of generational thing. Actually, there's some very, very able elderly people who have just embraced the whole digital technology thing just as almost as easily as the younger generation. For me, this is a culture change, and it goes to the heart of, again, what's been mentioned before about business purpose. And this is something that we've looked at in Atos for you know, some time, and actually we've just recently published our Journey 2024 thought leadership paper, which we publish every 2 years, and the title of that is Redefining Enterprise Purpose, and it's really exploring the need for businesses to rethink what their raison d'etre is in this new world as a result of game-changing things that have happened. And again, going back to what Katie said about organizational design and the importance of getting the organizational approach right. I recently co-authored a book on digital transformation called Deliberately Digital, and the essence of that was that businesses shouldn't just treat applying digital technologies as a bit of varnish to put over their organization. Actually, if they really want to make meaningful change, they've got to be deliberately digital at the heart of what they do. So in all that they do, embrace it. And we talked about you know, automation and things like that. And actually, automation has been proven can fail miserably if you don't do it properly, right? If you're just automating a little bit of a process and don't get the whole thing working right, actually it can become worse than not doing anything at all. So seeing how we apply digital to the way that people work in the context of the organization culture is really, really important. And for me, never before has the importance of business leadership been so critical, because individuals can't make the changes on their own, particularly in big enterprises, no matter how good they are. You know, this requires real executive sponsorship and drive and cultural change throughout the organization that will look very differently. And other panelists have commented how employees now are looking for different things within organizations. And it's my hope that actually the pandemic and the unfortunate nature of jobs being lost and businesses going bust, actually, if we look positively on that, that will create a potential foundation for building much more deliberately digital organizations and organizations that are fundamentally more sustainable in their practices, and organizations that reflect the challenge of and the potential digital divide in the future. And I think this calls for a whole load more responsible thinking within organizations. And I was just observing in the chat, I hope you don't mind me pulling this one out, Damien, that somebody was asking about, what is the digital divide and how do we deal with it? How do we as an organization, for example, Atos, help address disadvantaged people who maybe are keen to get on but don't have access to the right digital technologies and the learning. And again, I think this calls for enterprises to be a lot more responsible in the way that perhaps we mentor people, that we provide digital technology for people, perhaps the old laptops and stuff that we don't need anymore. Can we make those available? Can we work with organizations? I know, ANTS is dear to your heart, Damien, in terms of getting people along. So, instead of just leaving them by the wayside, how do we change that whole social culture as well as our organizational culture to get the best out of this new digital revolution we're facing?
Yeah, that's great, John. Thank you. Really insightful. So, Iain, John, thank you for your answers on that one. I'm going to change the pace slightly. We are rapidly running out of time. It's an incredibly important discussion and really insightful, but I do want to leave some time and get to COVID. And it has come up in a number of your really. So I'm going to bring Nimmi, Tom, and Katie in on this, and maybe could keep your answers maybe to a couple, so we have time to dive into questions at the end. But I'd like you to think about how COVID has impacted the skills landscape and skills that businesses need. Bring in any experience that you have. And bring that in relation to those digital skills, and also think about these skills that may decline as a result of COVID as well. So a big question, of course, but everything COVID and digital skills related. So Nimmi, could I bring you in, please?
Sure. So we've seen during COVID-19 that skills challenges have been accelerated. In particular, we've seen that a lot of people in the UK don't have the essential digital skills needed for work and life. And the Good Things Foundation have done fantastic work on this. And the Lloyd's Digital Skills Index will have a lot more information on the stats as to how many people don't have the correct digital skills needed to participate in the UK workforce. But I think during COVID-19, we've seen an uptake in people motivations to learn digital skills. So the government's online skills toolkit, for instance, has had a lot of clicks, and Google have reported that many people are taking on more digital courses on their digital garage. With sort of 6.3 million people furloughed, and I believe around half of those people furloughed were working from home in April. There's been a huge, uptick in demand for these courses, and I think that's really welcome. It's the impact of COVID has shown how important digital skills are, both in terms of work, but also communicating with our loved ones. And I think that we should build on this momentum and have kind of sustainable short-term policy recommendations on a government scale.
Great, thank you, Nimmi. Really interesting, thanks. And Tom, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, I would make three very short points. The first is I think the labour market is going to become a lot more competitive. It's easy to talk in platitudes, but let us be clear, we're about to enter the deepest recession for 300 years, and we're unlikely to see levels of unemployment like this. Certainly, these are levels of unemployment that we have not seen for 50 years. So it is difficult to overstate the disruption which we are now likely to see and the numbers of people who are going to struggle. And therefore, firms are going to be in a much stronger position to just be quite brutal about getting the skills they want, being quite assessment driven, which, by the way, probably is likely to be very good for social mobility, because you can just assess people's skills that you want, say I'll have you, you, and you, and everyone else, you know, back on the dole. So I think the labour market is probably likely to become a little bit harsher and more competitive. The second thing is motivation. To echo Nimmi's point, we've seen certainly a significant uptick in numbers of people interested in our online learning platforms, and in general, people who are self-interested in learning as opposed to being driven there by their companies. You know, our online learning platform has been doing a great trade over the last 3 months. So Cloud Academy, you know, we made it free to the NHS. There's also been significantly uptick in quite high-end digital skills learnt in a digital way. I think the last thing, the last point is about young people, which is, I think it's quite apparent to echo Nimmi's point that education is probably needs a big kick up the bum. It is comical that the poor levels of employment coming out of computer science degrees. Why have computer science degrees got such terrible employment outcomes? Well, it's because people coming out of computer science degrees often can't code APIs in the specific language that an enterprise needs. Right? So education is going to need to very quickly shift to providing skills which employers actually want and actually buy into, rather than sometimes what can be quite a disconnected educational establishment wants to provide. Certain things are bridging the gap very well there, and I would draw out apprenticeships as a very good example where there is genuine employer buy-in. So I think we hopefully should see significant increase in interest in apprenticeships, which are with employers, and in quite aggressive employer-linked skills being taught in our education establishments, from school right through to higher end of universities.
Tom, great, thank you. And that focus on education coming back out again. So Katie, can I bring you in as well, please?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of points from me. Agree with everything that Nimmi and Tom said. So the first thing I'd mention is we've seen a big focus on the more human side of leadership and management, and I would call that a skill, because that's a kind of an emotional intelligence and one of those essential skills that I mentioned earlier. I think even as we are, a lot of us, not working in the same place as a lot of our colleagues, a lot of people actually feel more connected now than perhaps they did before. And you're really seeing a massive difference between those leaders and managers who've got the skills and the emotional intelligence and awareness to really put in that time with their teams, and those who haven't. So I think there's a real awareness. I think it might have been Iain who mentioned it earlier about the importance of good people management. So I think that's only going to come out of this stronger. It's not that we didn't know it before. It just becomes even more important when you can't do management by walking around, and you can't judge people based on the amount of time they're putting in or if they're sitting at a desk. So I think that's one thing. The other thing would be, I mentioned learning agility earlier, and I think that's been incredibly key. We've seen in a lot of organizations that they've gone for redeploying people rather than furloughing people. So one organization I know redeployed all of their marketing team into their recruitment team because they were working in a sector where they suddenly needed to be hiring lots of people, but they didn't need to be marketing. So, you know, there are some vaguely similar skills there around communication, but they kind of just wholesale moved a team of people into another bit of the organization rather than furloughing them. And then the other bit that I just want to mention very briefly is I think this has been a very individual experience for everybody. And we shouldn't underestimate the fact that for some people have had a really great time working at home in their nice houses. Maybe they have their own study. Other people have found this incredibly tough. You know, if they're working at home, they might be sitting in a bedroom with a laptop on their knees. You know, there's a very different kind of experience that people are having. And in terms of the kind of digital divide, I think that a new divide we're seeing now is, can you work from home or can you not work from home? And those are the two types of work. So I just think we need to be aware to all of that. Otherwise, we risk coming out of this situation and just exacerbating the divides that already exist.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you, Katie. So look, we've had some fantastic discussion there on some really important topics. What I'd like to do, just as a close in terms of the panel discussion, and then I'm going to take a couple of the questions that have come into the chat. It would be great if we could just go around the panel, and if you could just give one example of some great practice that you've seen in this space, just for people to remember, take away, maybe do a bit of further research on. So I'll take a volunteer who wants to go first to give the other people some thinking time.
Yeah, I can go. So I've seen a bank take about 100 people who were laid off from a manufacturing plant and say, you know what, we need lots of technical skills. People in this manufacturing plant have the fundamentals, if not necessarily the specific skills. We're going to retrain them. We're going to put them through a bootcamp academy. It's going to take 3 months. We did, and we helped facilitate that. So we did all the pre-assessment, and we looked at drive and aptitude, not necessarily the end skills and their social background. We had a wonderfully diverse set of people, and we turned them all into coders. And so I think organizations that do need digital skills should actively embrace, like that bank did, go to places where lots of people have been made redundant, say, we want 100 coders and we're going to train them up, and go to someone like, you know, QA or there's plenty of others, and say, you make these people into coders, and we'll do all the assessment and make sure that you have the right people, and some people will make the switch in some way, but that's actual upskilling, right? Taking people who could not code before, and 3 months later they are work ready in Java or C+ or whatever, or .NET frameworks. Right? So I think that's best practice.
Thank you, Tom. And Nimmi, can I bring you in?
Sure. So FDM Group, which specializes in sort of retraining and redeploying people, the company has hired around 182 new IT trainees into its courses during the official lockdown period, and has pledged to continue the trend. Essentially, they equip candidates with the latest digital skills in kind of software development, data science, and cybersecurity. And I think that's fantastic, the ability to continue that employment and that recruitment. Also, the Bright Network are doing fantastic things with providing young people and grads with virtual internships with a range of organizations and companies. So they have different internships running in different sectors like consulting and technology. And to provide that virtual internship is invaluable to a young person or a person at university to be able to get that workplace experience that they wouldn't necessarily get during this difficult time. So we need to see companies do more of that.
Thanks, Nimmi. And Katie?
I know the FDM Group, and they're brilliant, but slightly different approach. I won't mention the organisation, but this organisation that I know that they're going to go on a massive digital transformation, and that they need, they really need to change the skills mix of the organisation. But what I really liked that they did is that they went out to the organisation and they told everybody, we commit to, I think it was 60% of these jobs are going to be created for people that are already here. So we will reskill you, we will make that commitment, and other people will look for people from underrepresented groups, and others will go for kind of a wider hiring process. But the fact that they made that commitment, I won't say publicly because I don't think it was public, but it was public within the organisation, if that makes sense, that just took a lot of the fear factor away, and it meant that people were kind of more engaged with the change.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Iain and John, please don't take offence. I'm not going to come to you just because we've got some great examples there, and I do want to spend 5 minutes on some questions from the audience. So thank you to the panel. I'm going to jump to a question from Andrew. So it's very relevant. Education has come up a number of times. So what new and innovative forms of education do you foresee as the digital transformation of education accelerates due to the pandemic? So relevant to COVID, but also to education. So Iain, is that one you'd like to chip in on, please?
Sure. So I mean, I think what we're seeing now is lots of organisation actually focusing on a much earlier stage in the education process around kind of inventive and innovative programs to help people at school age really start to develop those skills at a much earlier point. And that's starting to develop in a number of ways. I mean, we're even now looking, for example, at kind of online work experience and completely virtual internships as part of those kind of programs as well, because I think organizations are recognizing that you can't rely on the education system, I think, to prepare people for the future of the business world necessarily, and certainly not for the foreseeable future. That's a journey that the education system is going to have to go on. So the best way for organizations to be able to influence that is actually to support at a kind of much younger age. and really trying to work with children to help them understand the concept of working within business and what's important to businesses at a kind of much earlier stage in their development. I think that's one of the key trends that we're certainly seeing, Damien.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And Tom, clearly one that's close to your heart. Do you want to build on that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think two changes to education. One is it's going to become a lot more data-driven. I think we've seen that cultural shift happen over the last 10 years, but the practice shift is, I think, actually, bizarrely in education, the practice shift is probably some way behind. But I think there's going to be a huge focus on employment outcomes within education. And so to an extent, it's up to the educators to say, well, this is how we're going to achieve it, and to let a self-improving system generate the right practices for what creates the outcomes. Because what will be right in a city school in Blackpool will not be the same as something that's in leafy Surrey with a very different intake. So I'm hesitant to say best practices. In terms of the professional education, again, I think huge amounts more employer linkage. And that will be driven in a variety of ways. It might be, frankly, that government twists the arm of universities and says, we're not giving you quite so much money, you've got to find it elsewhere. It might also be some cultural shifts too.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. We've had a couple of questions come in specifically on the gig economy and whether organisations should put more emphasis on the gig economy and focusing on candidates having the relevant skills to hit the ground running. So John, is there something you want to build on from your answer to the very first question?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, and I know we're quite short on time, but by gig economy, I wouldn't wrap that up as 0-hour contracts, right? This is about a flexible way of getting people engaged with job opportunities. And the gig economy could be operated within the context of an enterprise, so giving people flexibility within an organization to identify where there's work and engage in some kind of outcome-based contract, as it were, but also building an extended network of people who have capability, who aren't necessarily dedicated to your organization, but you trust them and you can pull them in as required. Those kind of models are going to give much needed flexibility in this new way of working.
Great, thank you, John. And Nimmi, is there anything you want to build on from your perspective?
I just wanted to say that there's a lot more that we can do around the education piece. It's something that we shouldn't really write off for younger years, trying to embed digital skills in every subject and looking at that perspective from classroom and boardroom, and also more funding for the adult education budget as well.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Okay, so look, we're out of time now. So thank you to my panelists. So John, Tom, Iain, Nimmi, and Katie. It's been a really interesting debate and discussion. Can I ask the audience, please, to complete the pop-up survey? It will show up at the end of the event. It's really, really quick. We all say this bit genuinely, as it will take 1 minute to complete, and it's really important to us. So we can understand whether this hit the mark from your perspective. There's so much that's been discussed today. It's very difficult for me to summarize in probably less than 30 seconds, but we've touched on culture and societal changes, the impact of COVID, of course, flexible working, the critical importance of those softer skills, especially in leadership and management. Loved the quote around half-life of skills now being 6 years, moving from 30 years. John talked about Atos Journey 2024 and the focus on the raison d'etre, the purpose. So look, there's a huge amount that we've covered today, and we could talk for hours and hours and hours more on this. But please do share this with your colleagues, and we've recorded it. You can listen back. You can also go to the web page to learn more about what we're doing in this space from an Atos perspective in our thought leadership space. So thank you all. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to the audience, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.